The Sea of Galilee sparkled under the midday sun as Jesus and his disciples moved among the crowds. It had been a long day filled with teaching, healing, and casting out demons. People came from every direction, sick, desperate, hopeful, yearning for a miracle. And Jesus, full of compassion, met them with grace and power. By the lake's edge, Jesus taught in parables, stories with eternal truths hidden in simplicity. The disciples watched him with a mix of awe and exhaustion. They had never seen such power and peace united in one man. Every word he spoke pierced hearts. Every touch restored the broken. But even as miracles abounded, tension lingered. The Pharisees questioned his authority. The crowds were pressing closer. The disciples, though devoted, still wrestled with understanding who Jesus truly was. As evening approached, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Let us go over to the other side." The suggestion was simple, but the implications profound. The other side of the lake, the region of the Gentiles, was unfamiliar, even threatening. But Jesus was leading, and the disciples obeyed. They climbed into a small fishing boat, weathered by years of storms and sun. Other boats followed. The air was calm, but the sea, as always, was unpredictable. As the boat pushed away from shore, the disciples glanced back at the fading crowds, unaware of the test that lay ahead. Jesus, exhausted from the day's ministry, lay down at the stern, resting his head on a cushion. Soon he was fast asleep, even as the boat gently rocked with the waves. For the disciples, this was routine. Fishermen, born and raised by the sea, but the journey they were about to undertake would be anything but ordinary. In this peaceful moment, a storm was already forming beyond the horizon. A storm that would not only test the boat, but their faith. As twilight settled over the Sea of Galilee, the calmness began to shift. A soft breeze turned into a strong gust. The water, once smooth like glass, started to churn. Dark clouds gathered quickly over the hills. The disciples glanced at the sky, uneasy. They had seen storms before, but something about this one felt different, fierce, sudden, unnatural. In mere moments, the boat was tossed violently by wind and wave. The air howled as lightning cracked across the heavens. Waves crashed over the side of the boat, soaking the disciples to the bone. Their voices were lost in the roar of the storm. "Grab the sail," one shouted. "Bail the water," cried another. The small boat groaned under the weight of the storm. These were seasoned fishermen, men who knew how to read the water, but even they were terrified. Fear turned to panic. This was no ordinary storm. It seemed to carry a force beyond nature, as if creation itself was in turmoil. Each man fought the wind, clung to the sides, shouted orders, but the sea did not yield. They were losing control, and in the middle of this chaos, Jesus slept. There at the stern, his head still on the cushion, he lay in perfect peace, unmoved by the fury around him. It was as if he were in another world, untouched by the storm's rage. His breathing was steady, calm, silent. The contrast was unbearable. The disciples looked at him in disbelief. How could he sleep? Did he not care? Finally, one of them rushed to him, shook him roughly, desperation in his voice. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" The words were a cry of fear, but also of faith, twisted in confusion. They didn't yet fully understand who Jesus was, but they knew enough to hope he could do something. Jesus opened his eyes. There was no panic in them, no fear, only clarity and authority. He stood amid the crashing waves and shrieking wind and raised his hand. "Quiet, be still." Just 3 words, and in an instant everything changed. The wind ceased. The sea fell flat, as if someone had laid a sheet of glass over it. The boat stopped rocking. The rain vanished. Silence fell, thick, holy, weighty. The disciples froze, drenched and breathless. The storm hadn't just stopped, it had obeyed. And suddenly they were more afraid than before, not of the storm, but of the one who had silenced it. The sea was silent now. The only sound was the quiet dripping of water from the disciples' soaked robes. They stood still in the boat, their bodies trembling, partly from the storm, mostly from what they had just witnessed. The waves were gone, the wind had ceased, yet their hearts beat wildly. Jesus turned to them. His voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised, but his words pierced deeper than the storm ever could. The disciples looked at one another, their eyes wide, still gasping for breath. Then someone whispered the question that had begun to stir in all their hearts. "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." It wasn't just amazement, it was reverence, a holy fear. For the first time, they truly glimpsed the divine nature of the one they followed. They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, speak with authority. But this was something more. Nature itself had bowed to his word. No prophet had ever done that. No teacher had ever silenced the chaos of the sea with a simple command. They began to realize they weren't just following a miracle worker. They were in the presence of someone far greater, someone whose power transcended human comprehension. The boat drifted quietly on the now still water. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, painting silver lines where only moments before chaos had reigned. The calm was not just around them, it had entered the boat. But their hearts remained restless, not from fear, but from awe. What did it mean for them to follow someone like this? Were they ready? The question, "Who is this man?" would echo in their minds for days, weeks, even years. And as they continued to walk with Jesus, they would see more miracles, more signs, more power. But it was on this stormy night that their understanding of him shifted. The seed of revelation had been planted. Jesus wasn't just a man sent from God. He was God, in their boat, with them in the storm, and he was in control all along. As the disciples quietly sat, letting his words and power sink into their souls, the boat floated closer to the distant shore. The journey wasn't over, it had only just begun. But now they knew, when the storms come, and they would come, they had someone with them who commands even the winds and the waves, and they would never be the same. What kind of man commands the sea? What kind of voice calms a storm with a word? To the ancient Jews, the sea was more than water. It symbolized chaos, danger, the unknown. In the scriptures, only God could subdue it. In Psalm 89 it is written, "You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." The disciples knew this. They grew up hearing these words, and now they had seen them fulfilled, right before their eyes. This miracle wasn't just a display of raw power, it was a declaration. Jesus was showing them, and us, who he truly is. Not just a wise teacher, not just a healer, but the one through whom all things were made, the one who hovered over the waters in the beginning, the one who holds creation in his hands. In this moment, his identity became clearer than ever. This wasn't just about saving them from a storm, it was about revealing his divine authority. A Messiah, yes, but more than that, God incarnate. And the timing of this miracle matters. It didn't come when the sea was calm, it came at their breaking point, when they were certain they would die. when all hope was gone. That's when he stood and spoke. How often do we, like the disciples, panic in the storm? How quickly we forget who is in the boat with us. But storms, in the hands of God, are not punishments. They're platforms, stage settings for revelation. Without the wind and waves, the disciples may never have seen this side of Jesus. This story reminds us that true faith doesn't always come from safety. It often comes from desperation, from moments when we realize we're not in control and we must trust the one who is. Jesus didn't calm the storm to impress them. He calmed it to teach them, to stretch their faith, to confront their fear with his presence. It was a glimpse of the kingdom he came to bring, a kingdom where chaos is tamed, where peace reigns, where the Creator walks among his creation, bringing order to what is broken. And as the boat glided over the quiet water, every heartbeat in that vessel now beat with a new awareness. The Messiah was more than they expected. He didn't just bring peace, he was peace. They had witnessed a miracle. But more than that, they had encountered glory, and the world would never be the same. Long after the waters stilled and the boat reached the shore, the storm continued to echo, not in the skies, but in the hearts of the disciples. What they had seen changed them. The wind and the waves had obeyed, not a king with an army, not a prophet with prayers, but a man they had shared bread with. A man who had just revealed himself to be so much more. And today we are left with the same question they asked. Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? This miracle is not just a story locked in ancient history. It speaks directly to our modern lives. We all have storms, storms of anxiety, uncertainty, loss, pain. Storms that rise up in our minds at night and refuse to let us rest. Storms that threaten to drown our hope, our faith, even our identity. But this story reminds us that Jesus doesn't abandon us when the waves grow high. He doesn't wait for the sea to settle before he draws near. He is with us in the storm, sometimes silent, sometimes asleep, but always present. And when he speaks, the chaos listens. The power of this miracle is not just in what Jesus did, but in what he continues to do. He calms not only seas, but also hearts, not only wind, but also fear. He speaks into the center of our panic and says, "Peace, be still." So what does it mean to trust him? It doesn't mean we'll never face storms. It means we never face them alone. Faith is not the absence of fear. It's choosing to believe in his presence despite the fear. It's hearing the roar of the waves and still knowing he is here. In a world where chaos seems louder every day, this story calls us to remember. Jesus is not only a historical figure, he is the Lord of today's storms. He sees you, he knows your struggle, and he is not shaken. This moment on the Sea of Galilee wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the disciples' deeper understanding. From that day on, they would walk differently. Their fears, though real, would be filtered through a new lens. Jesus commands even the storm. And maybe that's what you need today. Not a perfect life, but the presence of a perfect Savior. So next time you feel overwhelmed, next time your spirit trembles, remember the boat, the storm, and the voice that spoke peace into chaos. You're not alone. There is one who calms storms, and he's still speaking today. Will you listen?